Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to a very special episode of the show because it's always a special episode of Sea of Tranquility when Mr. Derek Shulman is joining us. What's happening, my friend? Good to see you back here once again.
Great to see you, Peter. It's been a while, but I'm glad to see your face in the new year here.
Yes, another new year, another chat with the master himself, and we have something very cool to talk about, which I just finished a week or so ago, and that is Giant Steps, the
Oh,
autobiography.
yep. Yep, I think I know know about that book, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this was a fantastic read. I mean, and it's like, as I'm going through this book, A, because we've known each other a long time and we've talked many, many times, and I've been such a big fan of the band for such a huge part of my life. But what I think was really cool about this book is how it transitions from being in a band in the music industry to being a part of the music industry from a label perspective. And a lot of people know that about you, or maybe don't know that much about it. And you get the whole story here for the most part. And it's also a book about family and the interaction between you and your brothers. And I found this to be a absolutely fascinating read. And again, maybe because I know you personally, and that's kind of has a lot to do with it, but I think you can be a fan or a friend and still get the same thing out of this book. And like I said, I love the fact that it goes from one aspect of your career, and when that door closed, a whole other one opened up, and you get the full picture of the whole story leading up to something we'll talk about later on in the chat, which is happening now with you and people are going to hear about very, very soon. So what was it like for you to kind of go back and to the memory banks and put the whole story together for the first time like this?
It was it, well, it was a lot of hard work, to be honest with you. I was I never, honestly, I never intended to be an author. I mean, the idea that I'm an author is for me is kind of like bizarre. But we have, my wife and myself, we had a really good friend. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, who was the book editor of the New York Times, and we get together for dinners and lunches, and he was old, quite a lot older than me. But I tell him stories about AC/DC or about Bon Jovi or about, going on the road when I was younger and this, that, and the other. And he said, "These are great stories. You should write a book." And I said, "Jack," his name is Jack, or was Jack. And I said, "Jack, I'm not a writer." He said, "All you have to do, look, is put a couple of hours aside, and just dedicate yourself to doing it." And he kind of cajoled me. This is pre-COVID, into he said, "Have you started yet?" I said, "No, okay, I'll start." And I started writing about 60, 70 pages before COVID hit. And then COVID hit. And I got COVID actually right at the very beginning. I was lucky I dodged a bullet, if you like. But I was isolated in my bedroom for 6 weeks with all I had was Cuomo on TV and a laptop. And having put it down for a couple of months, I started in on my sort of recollections of when I was a kid and the first group I put together and then said, okay, and I got to about 160 pages. And then I put it down again because I was working on the catalog and all the other stuff. Um, I don't know for what it was. I was sitting one day a couple of years ago, or less than that, 18 months ago, and I started looking at the what I'd written, and I said I should continue. And in fact, my son Noah, um, a friend of his knew his friend called John Weidenhorn, who came into my, yep, there it is. And he said, if you want to kind of finish your book, um, he can work with you to transcribe what you have and finish it. And in fact, I met John and we rattled through it in about 12 to 12 months, and suddenly at the end of last year, I'd finished it. And we got an agent and we had a book deal. And suddenly I was an author. So here I am sitting here talking about all of the things that I went through, but I didn't want it to be um, you know there was questions about should it be like the crash and burn kind of book that most of the rock and roll books are about, which I could easily do, but and I've seen but never been part of. But no, I wanted to be about um, music, of course. Everything is about music, but me being authentic and me being truthful about who I am and what I am and why I do what I do and did what I did.
Yeah. I mean, it's clear that Gentle Giant and yourself and the rest of the band were never like a sex, drugs, and rock and roll type band. I mean, it's I know you were around a lot of that, and maybe a little bit of that happened here and there. But I think you did a wonderful job of saying, well, we weren't that real crazy band. We did do some fun stuff. Here is some of the fun stories. But for the most part, it's like this tale of like that little band that could, that like you guys knew you were different, you knew you were special. I think you knew deep down inside you were never going to be as big as like a Yes or a Pink Floyd or whatever, but that was okay because I think you were given the freedom artistically to do what you wanted, and you knew you had a core audience that loved what you did. And that really comes through in the book more than anything. And, I love the stories of life out on the road, I think are great. I love, and one thing I never knew, I knew you guys, and it's kind of topical because we've been talking about them so much the last couple of months. I knew you guys did plenty of live shows with Black Sabbath, but I never knew that you formed like a very close personal bond with the guys in Sabbath and that you played with them more than I even thought. I mean, you did like full tours with them for a while, right?
My first American tour was
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
and we were friends. I mean, we loved the guys. I mean, they were very completely down to earth. Rummies, from Birmingham. Uh, but the tour that we were on, which was our first tour, that I think it was the second or third, and they just discovered the wonders of Peruvian marching powder and other substances, and the tour was it was a little bizarre, to be honest with you. I mean, first of all, the audiences. I mean, literally, it was our first tour, and our music was hardly heard. And we would go on, to ladies and gentlemen, Gentle Giant, and we'd go on, and a huge boo would go up immediately. It was actually funny. We even then we laughed to ourselves because it was so stupid and funny that they booed because they didn't even know anything about us, but they booed just because. But we were smart enough actually that I guess in some respects, having had the I guess apprenticeship in Simon Dupree and even before of stagecraft and getting an audience who were adversarial on our side. So we generally we do the rockier stuff and leave out the xylophone and the violins and all the various.
You got to win that Sabbath crowd over somehow, right? So it's like play
So
the heavier stuff, right?
we became Led Zeppelin instead of Gentle Giant.
Right.
But so generally we go down at the end and there'd be a smatter of applause and that would be it. But the problem was that Sabbath would do their show and they get so screwed up after the show that they'd have to cancel two shows and after that. So we were stuck in places like Peoria or Fort Wayne, Indiana, or God knows where, Arizona for 2 days while they recovered. So it was a bizarre show, but
Yeah.
bizarre tour. And then we'd end up at the Hollywood Bowl, which I think people know about that show. That was the show to remember with Black Sabbath. I'm sure you
Yes.
know about it.
Yes. I think we've talked about that one before. You mentioned Simon Dupree before. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, you could have continued Simon Dupree for a bit longer and maybe even gotten bigger because you guys had a fair amount of success with Simon Dupree. Was it the creative juices inside of you guys that really wanted to do something different? Were you guys conflicted at all with saying, well, we could continue doing this and probably get fairly big and make really good money, or we could follow our calling and do what we really want to do? Were you guys conflicted at all in like one over the other? Or was it just like, this is what we want to do? We want to go in a different direction and we're going to do it. Success be damned, right?
The latter. Yes, you're right. We were still quite, not quite popular. We were very popular, and in fact, when we were discussing, doing what we did, deciding to stop the band, we met with several managers, and a couple of the managers, like Don Arden, for instance, said, "Why the hell are you waking? Why are you breaking up? You guys are you're making really good money. You're big in Europe. You still you can get a couple of thousand people a night in the UK. You get I mean, why would you want to do that?" And we just said, because we hate playing to audiences that are waiting for the hit, and meanwhile they're eating a scampi and chips on their plate. And yes, we were growing, we were growing professionally and personally and musically, and we'd be hearing other bands and other music outside of our little cocoon, and it was very we and playing what we were doing to an audience, even though we were getting paid very well, was becoming old for us. So we said, no, even though, yes, we could make a living and get even bigger, but no, let the music is much more important. We have to stop this. We have to stop this and continue to do something. We don't know what it is, and we don't know where it's going to go, but we have to do something which is, different from what we were doing then, because it became soul destroying, actually.
Right.
And we were very lucky in that we found another manager who was at the tail end of Simon Dupree, who saw in the Shulman brothers a desire to do something. We didn't know where it was going to go, but something different in a guy called Jerry Braun. And he subsidized the group to put Gentle Giant together. I mean, and that's something that in today's world is not almost unheard of. So he paid our salaries to find musicians and put a new band together for 6 to 9 months.
You kind of, based on what you said in the book, you kind of lost Jerry a little bit, right, when with acquiring the taste, because he's like, really, how are we going to sell this? The
Oh yeah.
first album is okay, but now there's like, there's no hits here. There's no, this is a little bit different, right?
Yeah, I think because he was managing Uriah Heep at the
Yep.
time, and a couple of other who else, Manfred Mann, and he believed in the first album had elements of rock and stuff, but then we said, okay, here's our next album, Acquiring the Taste, and he looked at us with kind of glazed eyes and said, I can't work with this, and we said, okay, um, I guess we'll find new management. So we we did, and we you know ran to the open arms of the gangsters, worldwide artists. And that's another. I wish I could expand I wish I could have expanded that story a little more on in the book.
I
In
was going
fact,
to say, we've all heard lots of stories about Don Arden. Was he as much of a character as we've all read over the years, and then some, probably, right?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
100%, yeah. And his partners who were worldwide artists who were Sabbath's
Yeah.
managers as well as ours. See if you have names drink here. Yeah. Oh yeah. It was the old days of the British Mafia,
Yeah.
and we're talking about the real deal. You know, and look, it was real, but so we signed with worldwide artists. Sabbath was signed to them. The Groundhogs, Edgar Broughton, if you remember them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What else? Stray, a group called
I
Stray.
remember straight. They're all really good bands, all these. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, none of them got paid, including us actually. But anyway, so we went over to Worldwide Artists when Jerry, said he couldn't understand what acquiring their taste was about.
Isn't it amazing how back in those days, because I remember I had a similar conversation with Carmine Appice probably 3, 4 years ago, where he was telling me when the Vanilla Fudge and then Cactus were coming up, they also got involved with the New York Mafia, who were somewhat involved in the music industry a little bit. So isn't it weird how, depending on where you are, if there's a mafia there, they've got their hands in everything, right? And you could very easily be an up and coming band and find that this is what you're involved with now.
Yeah, well, it was weird. It wasn't really weird for us because I mean, it's in the book, but in Simon Dupree, we were kind of taken under their wing. They loved us. I mean,
Yeah.
as a band, and this is why and how we eventually ended up with WWA because the guys from the Isle of Wight and the Isle of Wight mob, which was near Portsmouth in England, um, heard that we had left Jerry Braun, and in the same way that they took Sabbath away from Jim Simpson to Worldwide Artists, that this guy Wilf Pine, who was very infamous, he was a friend. It was crazy. I mean, they were buddies of ours. I mean, buddies that would I think is in the book that would leave swag at Phil's house, and come back a month later and pick it up. So yeah, they were crooks, but they were our crooks.
Which is okay, right?
Yeah, except that when we wanted to get paid, we realized that
Then there's the problem, right? Yeah.
yeah, when we heard that there was big deals on the table and lots of many thousands of dollars that no one had saw, then that's when the problems arose with them.
One of the things I really liked about the book as well, because I mentioned before how a lot of the book is also about family. I never realized that there was like a 10-year gap in age between you and Phil
Oh
and
yeah.
Ray. I mean, I had no idea it was that many years. So I guess was not surprising in reading that and you talking about his like final days in the band and how he was kind of ready to go and be like a family guy. And you noticed that there were some differences happening between you. That must have been very hard for you because I know you guys didn't talk for a long time after he left the band. And that's got to be rough because you're brothers, right? Your
Yeah, yeah, of
family, you love
course.
each other, right? But sometimes we've seen it happen in rock history so many times where you have family in bands together and then something happens. And it's unfortunate, but it happens. How hard was it for you all the years after that, not having your older brother there with you who had been with you since day one?
Yeah, yeah, it was, hmm, there was again a double-edged sword because myself and Phil, we obviously loved each other. We still do. But Phil's 88 now, and instilling in his piss and vinegar ways. It is he's great in great health, thankfully. Um, but we were the two front guys initially in Gentle Giant, and I guess we we were kind of I was the young lion in the pack taking the lead. I was the front guy. I was the guy that would write some of the music, but also most of the lyrics together with Phil. And we'd clash quite a lot. And the band would like cower in the corner. We clashed about nothing. I mean, it was just because, because I was the front guy and I was, I was I have a bit of a strong personality, but so did Phil. And we would argue and clash and it would be very vocal. And the rest of the band were cowering in the corner, saying, "Oh no, we're going to break up. We're bringing it back." And Ray would stop and walk in and say, "Hey guys, come on, man. This is bullshit." Ray was always a peacemaker. So when Phil actually left, um, the waters calmed, to be honest with you, even though it was very hard initially when he left, because he was my brother, and when he left, it was not on very good terms. During the American tour, which preceded him going, we went on an Italian tour. He would fly back to the UK to be with his wife several times during that period of time. And it cost a lot of money, and we were left high and dry for a couple of shows, and that pisses us off, to be honest with you. Today, when I reflect on it, of course I understand it. I mean, it's his family. That comes first before anything. But at that time, Gentle Giant and the band were the most important thing to all of us. And so, when he left, it was we were it was a shock and relief at the very same time. And then we were deciding how and why and what it would be like to be a five piece. And so we went into the studio and in fact recorded an album which you're wearing on your body right now. And that was the first five-piece piece of album that we did. And
And you talk in the book about how difficult this album was to make.
yeah,
But now, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, how now you can really appreciate kind of where you were coming from and where you guys were going. And I think by the time, Power and the Glory comes rolling around and then the album after that, you guys are like, Phil, we love you, we miss you, but we're steamrolling ahead.
yeah, yeah. It was a hard record to make because we weren't used to being a five piece, and we said, okay, how can we fill in the gaps that Phil provided? But we were able to do this, and we wrote it fairly quickly, and recorded it fairly quickly, and it has some kind of jaggedness and sharpness and some kind of electricity that at the time was not a pleasant electricity. It was hard to make, but now you want to talk later about this, but now when I look back and hear it, um, it's actually one of the best records we ever made because of those emotions,
Yeah.
because what we were going through was reflected in this album. Um, now that we can talk about what we're doing later, but I didn't like it at all when we were doing it, but now I'm listening to it in a different fashion, and but yeah, for the following albums where we were comfortable in our skins as a five piece, we toured, we blossomed, and we became a mature five piece, and I think there was a lot of calm in the group after Phil had left, and the five piece was probably the maturity and the best lineup for the band. It wasn't two people in front, it was one person, and the band were able to perform with their dexterity that everyone in the band had.
Yeah. I don't think anything was really lost. I just think you guys figured out how to do it a little bit differently with one less person.
Yeah, and we streamlined actually,
Yeah, yeah.
which
I,
was
I know a lot of people who their favorite albums are any of the ones between In a Glass House and Interview. I mean,
right.
there's some fine, fine records in there. Freehand is a favorite of many. It's one of my favorites. So, and that's no disrespect to the early albums because we love those too. I mean, Octopus and Three Friends. I mean, those amazing, amazing records. But yeah, and so you guys figured it out. You moved forward. You released a bunch of really good albums. And then this whole story, which I could ask this same question to any number of bands of your style, progressive rock bands of the 70s, as the decade wears on. Well, the 70s are closing, the 80s are right around the corner. There's a lot changing musically across the landscape. What do we do, right? Do we adapt? Do we listen to the record label pressures of hit single, hit single? You need to make something a little bit more accessible for radio that people will, prog rock is dead as we know it from the early mid 70s. And, some bands were able to do that
Right.
and move into the 80s. Rush and Genesis and Yes are three obvious choices, right? But other bands struggled with that, including you guys.
Yeah.
And you talked a lot about in the book about the missing piece and Giant for a Day and Civilian as being kind of difficult because you guys are trying to figure out what do you want to do based on the world that's changing around you. Was that hard as well? It must have been very difficult after Civilian to say, okay, maybe this has run its course because in talking to you all these years, I've always got the impression that you guys felt that those last couple of albums were maybe taking the band too far away from what it was always supposed to be. And rather than try and change too much, let's just put it to rest. We did what we were set to do. We're happy with the career we've had, and maybe it's time to just go do something else.
Yeah, effectively. We did, bend our integrity, if you like, in a certain respect towards the end because radio was an important marketing tool, if you like, and regular record companies would say, look, you do need a hit like those other bands you're talking about because they're not playing sides of albums, they're not playing this FM radio is now playing one track from an album, and
Yeah.
it goes on to become a hit single, and you become a pop band. But I'm going to say, thankfully, I'm so happy that we didn't become a band that ultimately had that hit that would become that would throw us into the 80s and 90s, because I've seen too many bands who have had that and become a band that they didn't start out being, and lost their integrity and also their authenticity. And that's something that every one of the band,
Yeah.
every guy in the band of Gentle Giant was completely authentic. They if I mean, we were probably selfish in that respect, but we said, look, we can't do this, then let's not do it. And
Right, because if for that you could have just kept Simon Dupree going all the way,
exactly,
right?
you're exactly correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I remember the last tour. It was a great tour, but I remember the tour before, and it started to feel like a job. And when music and creative thoughts become like a job, Carrie in particular found it very difficult to write in the way that he wrote, and kind of felt like it was a job for him rather than sitting and becoming, and Ray too, a creative force. And when writing music becomes like a job, you stop. You say, that's it. Let's say goodbye and close that chapter and move on to a different chapter, which is what we did.
Yeah. And I think as much, I remember the first time we met, Derek, it was in your offices in DRT offices 20 some odd years ago. Uh, I remember I said to you, I'm like, do you know how many people I talk to who are fans of the band, who want that one reunion show, that one last time? Would you ever do it? And you looked me straight in the eye and you're like, no, because if we did one, they would want another one, and they would want another one, and want another one, and we just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And I think you're one of the few bands from that time period that never did that. You basically stuck to your guns and said, all right, we have this career that we're very proud of that lasted, what, 10 or so years, and people love what we did. We're okay with that.
Yeah.
We're okay with that.
And yeah, exactly that. And I'm very proud, you know, I'm very proud of everything that the band did. I mean, including the other couple of members who were part of it as well. I mean, I think that it was the most. So we're talking about the book, and I reflected back as an old fart myself, and having had done a career, as you know. I look back on those 10 years, and they were magnificent.
Yeah.
There were years of incredible creativity, so much fun, and just something that I don't think, to experience that not many people have experienced. And when it felt like it could start to become um, a parody of what we wanted to be, that's when we said, no, 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 we
Yeah.
dare become a parody. That's something that would be very sad for us. And I think perhaps even the audience. I didn't want to be, a band that would change members or try to get into a size 30 waist when you're actually 38 waist, and wear the stupid the jumpsuit I was wearing and couldn't get into it, whatever. So it was time, and it was time to stop it dead in its tracks while we still had a good audience.
Right. Plus, I think, and which is a perfect segue to the next part of our conversation, you had that next stage of your life and your career, which happened fairly shortly there afterwards. And maybe if that didn't happen, maybe 1985, 1990, you say, all right, you know what? I've just been kind of messing around doing this, that, and the other thing. Maybe we'll get together and play some stuff or do another album. But that wasn't the case because you were a very, very busy man. And you became part of the music industry from a different perspective, right? More from the management and artist and relations and programming and all sorts of things. I mean, you working for Polygram and Atco and Roadrunner, and am I missing any here? I mean,
I still have my company which oversees various, like Frontiers Records,
Frontiers. Yep.
and other labels, and I mean, not so much anymore, but yeah, I worked on the I became Luke Skywalker, turning into Darth Vader,
Yeah.
which it was something I never ever planned. That when we broke up the band, I mean, I didn't have plan A saying, now here's what I'm going to do. It took a phone call from a friend saying, what do you think? And I said no initially. I have no, I didn't want to be part of that establishment. You know, that was never my intention. But I went to New York, had my interview with Polygram, and was offered a job. And I said, you know what? Well, let me see what it's like on the other side of the fence. And I I wasn't shocked, but I do remember, you know, going from office to office and realizing that this wasn't the music business. It really was the business of music. And every office, every person in each office had their own agenda. And they were the president in there was a president in every 34 or 35 offices. And I thought, boy, and to become a priority at a record company, you had to put these guys together and have them agree on something. And I thought, boy, if I knew then what I know about here in Gentle Giant, I perhaps could have, you know, we perhaps could have cajoled some of these guys at Capitol or Columbia to support the band to get that hit single or become this band. Anyway, it didn't happen, but I learned the music business from the inside out, if you like. And I became, you know, yeah, a record company guy.
Yeah. And a record company guy who discovered some pretty big bands along the way, right? I mean, for those who don't know, maybe you heard of a band called Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
Derek found them. Maybe you've heard of a band called Pantera. Derek found them. Maybe you've heard of a band called Dream Theater. Boom. You had a lot to do with the career of AC/DC and a bunch of other, all sorts of other bands, right? So I think that's someone who knows music and can pick talent, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, yes, a talent, but everybody, you
And
know,
songs, and you knew,
songs.
yeah,
And also, but also the bands that, I mean, well, you mentioned Pantera, but all the bands that, whether in whatever genre they were in, whether it was a Bon Jovi or a Cinderella or a Pantera or a Dad Reed Network, which didn't happen, or you know, Dream Theater, Pantera, Slipknot, whatever, they were all bands who were, again, I'll use this word, I'm probably using it too much, authentic. They were the leaders in that. You know, they weren't doing anything that other bands were doing.
yeah, they were unique, yeah, that for sure.
Right. And and if you're a follower, if you're a band that said that, you know, that looks at another band up there and says, "Man, let's try something like they're doing because they're making a lot of money," you will never make it. It's only bands that have their blinkers on and said, "Okay, we're going to do this, and we don't care if we're going to be big, small, or whatever." When I first saw Pantera, there's a story which is absolutely true. And I was running ATCO. I had a big staff, and I went down to this little club, excuse me, and you know I was aware of it because I saw a VHS copy of the new Pantera with Phil in it. But within three songs, I saw them and I thought, okay, let's see this. With the three songs, I became not just, wow, this is amazing. I became a fan. I said, this is a band that just like I've never seen anything like it or heard anything like it. But I know that having seen it and heard it and being there and felt that audience, a little 200 people audience, I almost jumped into the mosh pit, almost, but I didn't. But I said if they could do something to me, a jaded old fart, you know, a record guy, they're going to do it to everyone out there. So I signed them, and I knew that at that time. This is just a story about Pantera that MTV was the number one marketing company. They would never play this band because they were playing, you know, all these I think still hair bands and now Michael Jackson. Radio would never play this stuff, but I knew that had what they turned me on. as a live band, my marketing dollars would go into helping them go on the road. And the word of mouth would get out there. And so what they went out there before the first album was released. And when Cowboys from Hell went in, came out, it jumped into the top five. And I remember the head of Atlantic, Doug Morris, he said, "Who is this Pantera band? Is it some kind of hip hop thing?" And I thought, okay, so and that's what I had to deal with, to be perfectly honest, with other people in the record business. They had no clue about how how what developing a band is and how.
Very important. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you just mentioned it, but another aspect of the book that I love so much is because not every story in here is all diamonds and pearls. I love when you talk about how you got involved in like the rap genre for a little bit and how that just really wasn't a fit. You tried to make it work, and you admitted that you were kind of out of your element there. But I mean, most people wouldn't think Derek Shulman actually was working with some rap bands at the time.
that was yeah, it was crazy because that was part of when I joined when I took over Atco. There were a couple of bands. I inherited a couple of deals. One was Ruthless Records, and Dr. Dre was on Ruthless, and Michelet and DOC and Eazy-E and all the whole Compton crew. And I remember that I invited Dre and Jerry. I don't know if anyone's seen the documentary or the movie Straight Outta Compton. Um,
Pretty popular. Yeah.
yeah, but I knew Jerry Heller. Uh, we remembered each other because he was a promoter and he promoted Gentle Giant actually. And he came into my office and said, "You, congratulations, you're now in the driver's seat. And I want to whisper a word of advice to you. These what you hear about is real." And I said, "I don't believe it." I really didn't. I thought it was just a affectation. I thought it was like this is all image and bullshit. You know, so Ray came in and said, "I've got this new album." My girlfriend Michelle A, and he brought in these two other guys who were standing at the back like this, you know. And I only heard after the event it was Suge Knight and some other guy, but and I listened to this album and I don't know about beats and stuff, and I said, Dre, I mean, it didn't sound like Tico Torres, if you like. And I said, Dre, this beat sound weird. Can you remix it? And Dre said, sure, okay, I'd be happy to do it. He did, and in fact, he came back the week after with this crew and played this Michelle A album again. It was probably the same exact album that I heard. I'm serious, it was. But Jerry said it sounds great. It does. It sounds great. And I said, okay, sounds great to us. And in fact, we put a record out, and it became a platinum record. And then we had another one from them called DOC. But I remember going out to LA and meeting Jerry Heller and Eric Eazy-E in their car, and going to the studio in down in Compton, and putting my hand down in there, not the glove compartment, the side of the door, and literally feeling a gun and a baton. I thought, oh, okay, this is not just image. This is the real thing. And
This is real.
yeah, this is not just gangster rap. This is gangsters. And I, I, I said, no, I don't think I want to be involved in this world. Strangely enough, I mean, and this is a bizarre twist to that story, which brings us to today. The hip hop world, for whatever reasons, has glommed onto Gentle Giant, and we become, in the words of Questlove, um, it's a weird phrase, but I went backstage at NBC, and he said, "You guys have a ghetto pass." And I've never heard that expression before. I mean, so we've been sampled by some fantastic, amazing, hip hop artists. Travis Scott just had a giant hit with Hyena, and we were actually this year we became songwriters of the year because he started off his set with Proclamation. It's just a bizarre twist because of that time I said, I don't want anything to do with it. And now suddenly the hip hop world was like, you know,
Discovered the music of Gentle Giant, say, hey, we want to use some of this stuff, right?
yeah, exactly that. And Run the Jewels last a couple of years ago. So it's an interesting, weird dichotomy here.
That's crazy. Hey, before I forget, the guitar that I had you take out behind, you want to talk a little bit about that Kramer guitar?
Oh yeah, that's Richie Sambora's Kramer. You know what I'm saying? Still works. Oh, phew, is that a tune too? Oh, wow. It needs to be tuned up. So that no, Richie playing this, and I've got. I mean, the one thing that um I was lucky enough. I guess this is a kind of in a weird way, um, something that I had in the Summit side of the fence. Thinking about this, and Richie saying, "Had my guitar." I've got the Scorpions. What was his name? Guitar. Some blanking. I'm sorry. The Gibson.
Explorer.
Yeah, yeah, Explorer. Yeah, I literally have his Explorer. Um, the bands, including John, I mean, trusted me because they knew that, and that's something I brought over to the music business side, is that they couldn't say, no band could ever say to me, you don't know what it's like to do X. You don't know what it's like to do this.
Correct.
And I could actually sit down with them and, literally say, okay, well, I do know what it's like. And I also can say, okay, how about trying this chord or this chord and trying this B section or whatever and not be that, having had the experience of being a musician. So I could carry my whatever I learned as a musician over to the bands that I was working with. And I was very lucky in having that trust. I mean, especially with bands like AC/DC, who, you know, th ordinarily wouldn't let anyone from a record company close to them.
But you earned it.
Tonight, I guess I did.
Yeah. So the last time we had you visit us here, we were talking about the reissue of the live album, Playing the Fool. And at the end of that conversation, I asked you, so what's kind of next on your plate? And you talked about working on this album once again. And that's what we've been alluding to this entire conversation. So at the very end of this book, you talk a little bit about that. So can you talk to us about what's been going on with In a Glass House, your experience with working with that record once again and hearing it again all these years later, maybe in a different light, and when we can expect to see the reissue of In a Glass House? Because I know a lot of people have been waiting forever. I'm trying to that mid-afternoon sun here is like
I
coming
guess,
through the blends. I'm the whole time I'm trying to get away from it. I'm like, because otherwise it's like, duh. So how's that working out, and when can we expect to see that?
I would say the second quarter would be. I was in the studio last night, in fact, listening to the Atmos mixes, um, and I got together with a very, very incredible engineer, Eber Pinheiro, a Brazilian who's won Grammys actually for various Santana and various, and he was able to um, separate not just the stems from this. We didn't have the multi-tracks,
Right.
as one knows, but not just the stems. He had a program that could actually separate the tracks, and which is incredible. And we were able to remix in a glass house like it was we had the 24 tracks in our hands, and
Modern
it's
technology, right? It's crazy.
so unbelievable, yeah. And he just sent me the tracks that we were working. I was in the studio last night working with him, and I just listened to Way of Life and Experience in Atmos, it sounds incredible. And now we're working on the visuals and everything else. So I think this will be a second quarter release,
Okay.
and but it sounds. Yeah, I can re-listen to it now. I mean, you asked me before what it was like to do this album when Phil had just left the band, and it felt like a tough time. And for a couple of years, I really didn't want to listen to the album because it evoked so many negative memories. Now I listen to it and think, wow, I'm serious. I think, wow, this is such a really good album. And how did we think of those ideas? I'm being honest here. It kind of blew me away actually. And for me to say that is kind of dumb, but I'm listening to this amazing playing of this band and saying, wow, if I were in the music business now, I'd sign this band in a second.
That would be a safe bet, I think, right? What formats is this going to come out in? I know some of the various past reissues you've had, like vinyl and
Yeah, yeah,
CD,
vinyl,
Blu-ray, the whole nine yards. Yeah.
yeah, all the nine yards, the 5.1 Atmos, vinyl, even a mix without vocals, a dismantle mix, and it just sounds. It's so much so different to the original. Not different, but it's so much better than the original album. It fills out all the gaps and the low end that we didn't have. And it's for me now, it's one of my favorite albums. Having gone to from close to the bottom to right up at the top for me.
I've had to talk about here on air so often, like what my favorite Gentle Giant album is, or favorite albums and whatnot. And I think over the last probably like decade or two, I have either had In a Glass House, Three Friends is kind of my current favorite because that's the first one I ever heard, or Octopus,
Yeah.
Free Hands. They've all been my favorite at some point in time. Power and the Glory, because they're all so great, and any one of them can be a favorite at any given time. And I often go back and forth, back and forth. But of late, I tend to go back to Three Friends just because that was the first one. There's something really special about that album to me, anyway.
Three Friends is a really, yeah, it was a getting this is Gentle Giant becoming getting out of the sort of uh, nursery, if you like, becoming a band and having a different drummer and a different way of looking at things. And lyrically, it's a really interesting album. And we were maturing that time. We
Yeah.
we toured America. And we were becoming a mature, real band as opposed to a band looking to what direction we were going to go in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely you can tell you guys are a bit younger and I think you guys matured greatly musically over the next couple of albums, but there's still some magical stuff on there which I really, really like. But that's not to say that 6 months from now I may talk to you and say, yeah, you know what? It's this album that's my favorite this week. That's the joy of the catalog, I think, that at any given time you can have a different favorite album because they're all so strong. Did you ever think when we first met, how about 20 years ago, 21 years ago, 22 years ago, whatever it was, you were in the midst of reissuing a lot of the albums, remastering the albums on the DRT label. That was kind of what was going on then. Did you ever stop to think that now, all these years later, you would still be so heavily involved in Gentle Giant music still after all these years? I mean, this has been almost like a full-time gig for you, just working with the old Gentle Giant albums for all these years, right? I mean,
Yeah, yes, and well, my son has been very instrumental in utilizing the social media platforms, and but what's amazing to me and what I feel is yes, there's a lot of talk about people about technology and technology taking over, but what I find very encouraging, just for me and musicians, is that there's a lot of great musicians out there who have looked at YouTube and seen, our band. And I think one of the highlights of the last few years, if you like, was when my son Noah and Ray put together that proclamation video that
yeah.
during COVID. But these are young, very young, guys who are playing along, and that makes me feel like there's still musicians out there that want to do something which is different and not use their Pro Tools or God or AI or God knows what else. to produce music that is not, is not a real, creative force. There's still, if I were a musician today, and I don't know who I spoke to someone, uh, if I saw a band today, I would love to see a band. I'm sorry, I'm going to take myself back to the very beginning of when I heard the Beatles on the radio. And I went to see, there's a story, it's not even in the book, I don't think. And I remember I wrote my teacher a note saying, please excuse it. I was at grammar school. Please excuse Derek for being absent. He has a stomach bug. And the Beatles were playing Portsmouth in the Guildhall. That was their first tour. And I just had to see them. So I went in line to see the Beatles, and yeah, and while I was there were cameras there from the Southern TV, just showing how much the Beatles were popular in those days. It was like Love Me Do was out and From Me to You was out, I think, and those are the two. But their popularity was insane. Um, the day after, I mean, so I went to the show and it was just incredible. Screaming was incredible, but they played. I mean, they were amazing. They all they had was a drum riser, three mics, and playing just superb songs without any bells and whistles, no pyro,
That's all
no.
they needed.
It, so I'm getting back. So the day after on TV, they talked about the Beatles, and then they showed the line of kids lining up, and who should see this line was my headmaster, and he said, Shulman, could you come to my office? And he said, where were you last night? Because I thought you were sick. And I got two whacks of the cane on my ass for being in line to see the fucking Beatles.
Busted.
Busted. But you know what? Despite that, it was worth it. But what I was going to say is, if I would just love to see a band who just had that, just play and sing without all the bells, who had mastered their music and played amazing songs. I tell you, the one thing is that's just beyond my comprehension today is there are no songs anymore in today's popular music. There variations on one chord. And that I guess that works, in the analytics, but as far as music is concerned, it doesn't. Not, I'm lost actually. Maybe I'm the old grumpy granddad. I'm lost with it, and there seems to be no melody or a change of chord or character or choruses or even styles. And that's why, in some ways, the hip hop world intrigues me more than what's going on in popular music. Um,
You
but
have to
anyway,
wonder when it comes to popular music, is that the fault of the artist or is that the fault of the music buying public? I
and
often think that the artists are giving us what we want, right? And are so many of the music buying public or music consuming public, is that good enough for them? Obviously, it must be.
well, there's also the music business, of course, and that's a whole different thing. And it's good enough for them because they rely on several, big artists who play who record this kind of music. But if their livelihood depends on their catalog,
Yeah,
if it wasn't for their catalog of Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Yes, Crimson, etc., they wouldn't be in existence.
right.
And those are the bands that, or the Beatles or whoever it is, and those are the bands that I still revere and would love. Had it not, if they didn't have those or Pantera or the bands that I was involved in, um, they wouldn't be in existence. And so,
There's a reason why people are still listening to that stuff to this day. Just people our age and people a lot younger. I mean, that stuff is going to be timeless. And the reason why I asked that question before, because I think a lot of people today, regardless of what age, maybe the people that aren't real serious music lovers, they're willing to take whatever's thrown at them. they digest it, they listen to it, they move on to something else. They don't really attach themselves to too much of anything. So you can feed them whatever you want. They'll like some of it, they'll throw away some of it, but ultimately it's just the music itself becomes very not important anymore.
Right.
And that's a shame that so many people are willing to just accept that. I mean, I think it's on us to want more, right? You know, you mentioned the Beatles before. Is it so wrong to want another Beatles or something like that that's going to be long lasting, that's meaningful? I think we should demand that from our artists, right? Because I'm sure there's lots. Trust me, Derek. There's a lot of bands and artists out there who are making really really good music, but unfortunately,
Yeah,
so few people are hearing it. That's the problem.
right. No, I agree about, it's you know, it's sad that again, you're right, that the lowest common denominator is winning right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
However, I still believe that people, I see a lot of musicians who, who or people who see or on TikTok and got or Spotify, and they say, I'm not getting paid for this. Well, you know what? As a musician, when I started being in a band, and in Simon Dupree, and even in Gentle Giant, it wasn't about money. It was never about money. It was about making music.
Yeah.
And it didn't, okay, we make a living, thankfully, as musicians. But it was much more important to be really good musicians and play for ourselves first. And hopefully people would come to see us and enjoy it. And not be worried about how many streams you have, how Spotify is doing, how much you're getting paid. There's a lot of entitlement out there. Hey, listen, Spotify this, I should being paid this. No, you're not entitled to be paid anything. You have to just put your head down. I mean, we talk about the Beatles. They played 15 nights a week in Hamburg to become what they were, and Simon Dupree and the Big Sound. We played literally, 11 or 12 nights. We could do all-nighters. We did 3 shows a day to even hone our skills to become a band that would record. So it doesn't come in 5 minutes.
No, no, doesn't.
And today's generation, I feel, want it to be popular in 5 minutes with how many likes and views they have. And that's
It doesn't work that way. I mean, I get it here on YouTube all the time. I talk to people who are like, I started a YouTube channel 6 months ago and I only have 75 subscribers. Why don't I have more? It's like, well, because it's not the way it works.
yeah.
It's not the way it works. You think I got to where I am overnight? It took years and years of hard work. It's like that's the world nowadays, no matter what you're talking about. It takes nothing happens overnight anymore, and you have to work at it. It's just this whole
Yeah.
thing of entitlement is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
You can apply it to any number of things, unfortunately.
That bothers me about this, what's happening. I mean, tech can work in a great way, but it can work in a negative way. And I think that's the negative part of what's happening and the entitlement of young people, especially in music, that, they get lots of views and likes in TikTok and they think they're entitled to be stars, and they're not. Just get on, get great, not good, be great at something you do, which is not like anyone else, and and go on stage and get 2 or 3 people to watch you. And if 5 or 6 people show up again, that's great.
Yeah.
That's what we did.
Yeah. You put on a good performance, you're passionate about it, and the audiences will come. But you have to do that. You have to feel it for it that way. Yeah.
So
Crazy.
yeah,
Crazy. So, folks, this is the book. You can get this pretty much anywhere, right, Derek? It's available on all the outlets.
on all the other outlets. Yeah.
Yeah, you got quote from John Bon Jovi on the back, Elton John, Ian Anderson, and Steve Lukather. By the way, Steve Lukather's such a character. I haven't talked to him in a while, but he's awesome.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's stories about all these folks inside, and you get lots of pictures and photographs and things and cool stuff. So it's loads and loads of fun. And like I said, what's great about this is not only you get some really cool behind the scenes information about Gentle Giant, but also about Derek's career in the music industry. And you'll hear him talk about a lot of bands you are very well familiar with who he dealt with directly, which is very, very cool. So always a pleasure to see him here, my friend.
You too.
Uh,
Thanks.
I'm assuming this comes out, we'll be talking again because that's kind of what we've been doing the last couple of years. You've had so many interesting things coming out that we love having you on here to talk about it when it happens. So,
You know, Peter, I'm going to do, as long as you keep it to yourself, I'm going to send you a mix.
okay, I will definitely keep it to myself. Yeah.
But
So for everybody watching, don't ask me because you're not going to get it. So
thank you.
for my ears only, yes. You won't be the first one who's done that. And trust me, and whenever and people are always like, "Hey, can I get a hold of that?" No, you cannot. That's for me.
Right.
You'll hear it soon enough, everybody. So just be patient. So thanks to Derek Shulman for joining us here today. Remember, go out and check out Giant Steps, the amazing new book. And please, if you have read it already, let us know what you thought of it down in the comments below. And if you're just bought it or you're going to go get it, check back in on this video and let us know what you thought down below. And we'll see Derek again here fairly soon, I would assume. And in the meantime, visit us on the web at www.seatranquility. Oh, hold on. There's one more question I have to ask you.
Oops.
One more question before we go, because I've been this one. So, out of when you were in the music business, when you were working for the labels, was there ever one band that you took note of that you really wanted to sign and it didn't quite happen? You let them get away and they wound up doing something somewhere else. Was there any one band that you have like a regret that you didn't snatch up back in the day, or did you basically all the ones you really really liked you guys hooked up with?
Um, okay, I did miss one. I mean, for the most part, most just every band that I wanted to sign, I signed. But there was one I missed, and I didn't quite get it. I was at ATCO at the time, and this guy called Beck walked into my office and played the song "Loser," and I didn't get it. I'm I'm being very honest. And I said, yeah, it sounds kind of weird, but it's cool. But and I can't remember who was with me in there. So we passed on it, and they put, I guess they found another label, and it came out, and it was a huge hit.
Yeah.
And okay, I missed that one.
I figured there had to be at least one. I'm reading the book and I'm like, you're talking about all these great bands. I'm like, oh, this is great. There had to have been at least one
That
that
was
got
one.
away.
Yeah,
Got away, right? There you have it.
I admit it. You know, it wasn't. I
You
it,
can't win
it,
them all, right?
what could I say? I mean, I did miss that one.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I think you did very, very well for yourself, and you got most of the other ones, which is that's the important thing. So you can't have them all, right?
Right.
So thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you soon here on the channel. I am Pete Pardo for Derek Shulman. Have a good rest of the day, everybody. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.